Hello and welcome to another edition of What It Takes, where we try to look at learning from a broad perspective. Television news personalities have a unique place in our lives, and when one of them stays in a community for decades, they become a part of the fabric of a community, as we welcome them into our homes while we live our lives. My guest today is Robin Reed, a longtime fixture in Roanoke media, both as a meteorologist and as a newscaster. In addition to his work on the air, Robin also teaches communications at Virginia Tech. I'm delighted to have him in the studio today. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you, Tom. It is a delight to be here and have a conversation with you today.
Well, all I can say is almost 40 years. When you first came to Roanoke many years ago, a few years ahead of me.
Yes.
How long did you think you'd be here, and what were you looking forward to?
I think the standard rule for TV people, this is 1982, mind you, was stick around for 2 or 3 years and then you're off to the next job, because everybody thought that New York was the final resting place for all broadcasters, so you just cycled your way into bigger and bigger cities. And when we first moved here, my wife Teresa said, I enjoy moving, so we look forward to our next destination, and we blinked. And a lot of years had passed, and we'd raised our children here. And so again, time does move quickly when you're having fun, and we were having fun the whole time.
Right, and I will just say that I had a brief stint at WDBJ. We worked together in the studio there, and it was a lot of fun. So I can see why somebody would stay all of those years. I know you were really into sports in college, and what made you choose broadcasting? Oh,
it was chosen for me by my grades my freshman year at James Madison. A student athlete is a really interesting person. To be able to juggle both of those responsibilities, especially if you're a scholarship player, is immensely difficult. So I could play baseball, and by the way, I was trying to get a position on Brad Babcock's team at James Madison. Brad's son Whit is now at Virginia Tech as their guy that takes care of all the big hires. So he's got some work on his hands right now. But the point is, you had classes and you had practice, and which one was going to take a priority in your life? So I came home at Thanksgiving my freshman year, and my mom said, I just had a look at your report card because they send it to whoever's paying the bill. And she said, that math grade looks pretty poor. And I said, well, I can't go to the math class because it's baseball practice. And she said, well, you have a decision to make, don't you? And I said, yeah, I want to play baseball. And she said, that's not the right answer. So once again, having to make a decision then led me to what I thought was the most logical connection, which was, I love sports. Why not be a sports broadcaster? It made perfect sense at the time.
And when you arrived at the station, the standard, the weatherman, which was what we called them back then.
That's right.
Or the weather person. What kind of special training in weather did that require?
This is going to be a true story because those are the best. So I'm in Harrisonburg at WHSV-TV, the ABC affiliate up there, and I'm doing sports and having a grand time. And then one day the weather person doesn't show up. She had a full-time job as a real estate agent, and she was closing, and it was an important closing, so she called over and said, I can't do the weather today, get somebody else to do it. And the anchorman's sitting there, and he looks at me, and I've got my sports script already, and he's got his news script already, and he says, well, I'm not going to do it. And I said, well, I don't think I can do it. And I don't need to tell you who won that argument. And the problem was I knew a little bit of geography, but I didn't know any weather. So I went to the map, a shag carpet with felt things stuck on it, and said, over here in Virginia and over here in Texas and Montana, looks like it's going to be cold. And afterwards, the phone started ringing and said, that guy's pretty good. No talent whatsoever for the meteorology side, but the ability to just present the geography seemed to be a winning combination, and that's how that fell into place.
What's it like for you now when you go back to Harrisonburg and see the growth of that college and the communications program and everything else there?
Yeah, I got lost the last time we went there because all the roads have changed and everything has just grown so much. And I'm so excited for James Madison because, Harrisonburg, once known as the turkey capital of the world, is now becoming a world-class center for a lot of things, their nursing program, that sort of thing. But the communications program is also pretty good.
So I don't know if you recall this. I mean, I know you recall your part in it, but in 1985, when the flood of '85 happened, I was one of those who was able to get to the station, and so I was there in the studio with you through that whole thing.
Right.
There is a story that I may or may not be true about your decision to actually go and become a meteorologist, and is the story that I've heard true about the flood of '85 and how that helped you make that decision?
Absolutely, because at this point I've been at the station for 3 years, and again, that clock is ticking. Should we be going somewhere? Should we be doing something? Well, as the water was rising that day, we checked with our next door neighbor. We were living in the Wasena neighborhood at the time. We were right on Main Street in Wasena.
Down by the river.
Down by the river, and as it turns out, if we bought a house on the other side, it all goes uphill there, but we were down by the river, and the water was rising and rising, so I busted to work, got there. It took forever to get there, and I got a phone call from my wife, and she said, I'd like you to listen to this. And I said, what's that? And she holds the phone to the basement door, and it's the sound of my new indoor swimming pool being built because the water's now coming in to the cellar. And she said, what should I do? And being a bit of a knucklehead, I must have given her great advice like, well, take Patrick, our 2-year-old, she's pregnant at the time, and go to the second floor. That would be a safer place to be. She goes, that's all you got? And I said, that's all I got. The water kept rising and rising and rising, and finally there was a knock on the door, and some men had come with a flat-bottom boat, and they were in the water up to their necks, and they were pushing this boat around, seeing if they could evacuate anybody. And my wife then called me and said, what should I do? And I said, is it a good-looking boat? She said, no, but it floats. So they got in the boat, went across this Main Street to higher ground, and what happened after that, Tom, is really why I decided to stay. The outpouring of kindness from the community, the just genuine gestures of help and concern, and it just kept piling up, and people would clean things up and do whatever they could, because the weatherman on the corner house was flooded. And you know, when you have people do that, you begin to reassess whether you're at the right place. And at that point in time, I knew we were at the right place, and at that point in time, I knew I needed to go back to college to learn how to be a meteorologist.
And I'm going to pick up my piece of paper here, because I see that you have a combined degree in meteorology from Penn State, Ball State, Mississippi State, Portland State, Lyndon State, and the USDA Graduate School. First of all, how many alumni fundraising calls do you get? But also, like, how did that work? Now, as we talk about lifelong learning,
sure.
You know, how did you put that all together?
So keeping in mind that this is pre-internet, anything social media, this is the old-fashioned, if you're lucky, the professor will videotape the lecture on a VHS and mail it to you. You take your courses in real time, and then thank goodness the library at Virginia Western Community College would proctor the exams. So it took 6 years to pull that off at all these different places, and I was able to cobble together enough to complete the full degree for meteorology and then join the American Meteorological Society. A couple of those institutions do in fact still send a little letter every now and then to remind me that, you know, maybe, hey, how about a little money? But nonetheless, it was the hard way to do it, but again, I didn't think I'd be doing that, you know, when I left WHSV. I thought I was being hired at WDBJ for a reporter's position. It wasn't until late in the conversation when they said, oh no, you'll be doing weather. So that's how we got to that point.
Right, right. I like to ask people in your chair, when it comes to learning and education, are there any specific teachers you recall that positively or negatively, you know, really changed the course of your life?
So we moved a lot. My dad was in the government, and we lived mainly overseas, so every 2 years we were in a different country, so that's kind of a jumble. But once we got back to the States and I started my education at James Madison, then I started running into people that were very impactful, and one of them was our communications teacher that taught us how to perform and how to give speeches. And she was, I don't know, she was 4'10" and just a ball of fire, and she just made us all marvel at the skill set it takes to perform in front of people, give speeches, that sort of thing. So she's high in my memory, and when I teach that now, she stays right in my memory because she was so good. I had a philosophy professor that thought that I should go into philosophy. Well, I wrote most of my papers at 4 in the morning, so that was, you know, maybe I was more philosophical then, maybe I was better then, but I didn't really want to do that. But Tom, the thing that really connected me to WMRA was the radio station. They had a little student-run radio station. You could get, if you took a wire and you put it on your radiator, that's how the signal was transmitted, right? Remember those days? Mm-hmm. Well, WMRA was the 50,000 watt NPR station that was built the year I went there, and it was like, wow, you know, everything smells new here, even the carpet. And I became totally entranced with radio and have never really left it since. And so that the teachers there and the staff there is really what you never forget, because of the sheer panic of being a student and being told you're on the air, and you know there's a lot of pressure there.
Right, right. I made that decision in communication school not to be on the air. I don't know how I ended up here, but I'm going to hold the camera. That's going to be what I do.
That's it.
So I know that since early on, as a meteorologist, and that schools and visiting schools and having a little educational component to what you do on the air has been important. I think about weather school and some of the other things you do. I know that you're busy, and that's always an interruption in the day, but why have, I know that a lot of that is focus that you've put on things. So why is that important?
I didn't see it coming, to be honest with you. Everything was, you know, TV, 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 you know, you're going to be on TV. But once you settle into a community, and it takes about 6 years for people to remember your name. Once that happens, the dynamic changes. So what happened was education was going through some shifts in when they were going to teach certain subjects. And it turned out that 4th grade was the beacon of meteorology. That's when they started talking about clouds and precipitation, and all the great pictures were drawn in the classroom. So we began just making ourselves available as educators from a distance. We would supply materials. You mentioned weather school. That was a marvelous program that came out of Boston that we were happy to kind of lead the way with. And you know, it took off. We were handing out free educational materials to schools, and they really thought that was a good idea. And it grew and grew and grew. Next thing, you have 10,000 books out there, and that leads to the very next step, which is, hello, can you come visit us for a classroom visit? Well, sure, we'd be happy to do that. So back in those days, we only had 2 meteorologists, and now we have 4. So it was an late to bed, early to rise routine of going to the schools first thing in the morning. 4th graders are very special, and then they would generally, once you got in the classroom, would invite you to go to another class because they had you in the building. So you were captive at that point. But then sometimes you would end up in the kindergartners, and they're great. All they do is hug you. And so you left the building feeling great about things, and we're happy to accept the next invitation to come speak.
You're now a professor of practice at Virginia Tech.
Right.
And tell me what you're teaching and how, you know, how did that come about? And again, busy schedule for you. That I'm sure you're going to Blacksburg. That's not close.
That's a commute that gets a little hairier each day, but that's another story, another program. So what happened was, after visiting all these schools and talking to all these 4th grade classrooms, the teachers, I then learned, have to do their continuing education credits. And they did it at Virginia Western. And because the old WDBJ was right down the street on Colonial Avenue, I was asked to teach a Teach the Teachers class, which was fascinating because it turns out that teachers are more grade conscious than, you know, anybody else I'd ever met. You know, they all wanted A's, so they worked really hard. And so for a couple years I did that, and that put a little bug in my ear that I like this a lot. This makes my day. And so when that kind of wound down through natural attrition, Dr. Bob Denton at Virginia Tech, who was at our television station as the political analyst, said to me one day, you look like a natural teacher. Why don't you come work for me? So, Bob, I've got a day job. I'm pretty busy right now. And he said, consider it. And so one thing led to another, and I didn't know what a professor of practice really was. And in fact, I was not really prepared for the switch and transition to higher education, because they have a different world. And the professor of practice is just sort of a contract player. They bring you in for certain classes, and you're just as happy as you can be. The politics are really removed from the job, and that's fine. But what happened was we got started, and then I had been there teaching just regular communications classes, and they said, would you like to develop a class in media weather? And I said, why, yes, where do I sign up for that? Little did I know how much governance was involved in that, because I'm at a state university. My gosh, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to do that. We did it, we made it. And this fall we're teaching our first media weather reporting class, and it's fabulous.
I'm guessing that it was probably fully subscribed when it went on the schedule.
We were full, yes, it was the first class that filled up.
So your experience of being around these college kids now, and also younger people at the station.
You noticed.
Well, it's hard not to for all of us. What does that do for you?
I think it keeps me plugged in. We have a small farm in Fincastle, and if I had my way, you know, it would be tractor time and trying to figure out if I can grow a tomato. But keeping time with the students gives me a whole new perspective about things, and I would never know if I wasn't around them. The music, the culture, the entertainment, and when you step too far away from that, you kind of fall out of sync pretty quickly. So for me, that's the joy of just getting together with them and saying, who's that, what's that, and why is that important?
Right, and how old are your kids, your own kids now?
So I've got one that's 38 and one that's 36, so they're no help at this point.
They're not hip anymore either,
well,
are they?
They're doing their own hipster thing, so.
Right. And in terms of, you mentioned that, there were 2 weather people and now there's 4. It's become just the shift in its importance in broadcasting, right? You've overseen a lot of that or been a part of it, even though you're not doing weather anymore. Just the transition of weather from a 2-minute thing that they used to do because it could be a place for a car dealer ad to what it is now. How's the role of meteorology changed in broadcasting? I
think because broadcasting news became there were so many more shows and it was so common. When I first started, there was a show at 6, a show at 11, and that was it. Right. Monday through Sunday, that was it. And in fact, for a stretch there, we were down to 1 meteorologist because the other one went to Louisiana or something. So I don't know how many months it was. It was a long time, 3 months. I worked all by myself. And while that was a long grind, we only had 2 shows a day. Right. And that second show was pretty much a lot like the first show. So
weather forecast doesn't generally change between 6 and 11?
It doesn't change much in 4 or 5 hours, right? So, Tom, what happened was the phrase that the consultants came up with is weather is king. And I listened to that and I said, how could weather be king? I mean, everybody listens to it. And they said, no, everybody listens to weather. Weather's king. Therefore, we're going to monetize that. That's going to be where the money's made. So they bought the computers and they took weather to a different level. And so we could hire more people and we could try to tell the story because goodness knows, from 4:30 in the morning till 11:30 at night, there's a lot of shows to fill.
I bet. And the technology has changed. I mean, you've gone from shag carpeting and some drawings. I think it'd be fun to do a throwback newscast, by the way, with that technology. But have you noticed as the 20-somethings come in as digital natives, no problem clicking, what have you noticed about sort of how that's changed the newscasts?
Before I answer that, let me just look at your set. I think we could get that shag rug right here. All we need are felt clouds and sun, and you put them on there. And the thing was, you had to be really careful to just point at it. Because if you bumped it they all fell down, right? And I did that a couple of times. And then we transitioned to plexiglass with markers, which we had to clean off after every show. To answer your question, it's fascinating to watch people who don't think about technology at all. I'm preoccupied with making sure that I can start my computer. They don't even think about that. In fact, they don't even know about it. They're too busy creating the images you're going to see. And if it doesn't do it the way they want to do it, they're going to do it in virtual reality. They're going to do it in 3D. They're going to do all these kinds of things to try to tell the story in a more creative way. Something I could never think of, but people like Brent Watts and Ian Cassette at Channel 7 and many of the meteorologists in the Roanoke area and all of Southwest Virginia, they're always thinking, how can I show this differently and really have an impact on people? Because everybody else out there that's watching is also distracted from everything. So you really need to have something special to get their attention.
Sure, sure. And it's not just, I know there are many, many newscasts now, but there's all kinds of other outlets that
Right.
we and you are producing content for. Right. Do you think the time of that 6 o'clock destination newscast, I mean, is that, I know it's still really important, but where is it in the list of importance of things like Facebook video or live, tweeting or whatever it might be?
Linear television is still for the more senior of our viewers. Linear television doesn't matter to most younger people because they do have a constant stream of choices they can make. What's interesting is often they'll let it be sort of guided for them. They go on Twitter and they go to the news feed and they don't really ask much of it. They just see what they see. When you're watching destination television, when you're watching 60 Minutes or any of those other shows, we're going to tell you what you think you need to know, and if that's not the way you want to gather your information, you just won't. So I think it's a blend now of things that all work, but I would imagine in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be entirely different from what you and I are doing right now.
Oh, I think that's definitely right. Going back to your teaching a little bit, because this is a learning show.
Okay.
Do you have, you are not a trained teacher, so I don't know whether you've thought about this at all, but do you have a philosophy of teaching, or when you're designing a lesson, you've designed a course, what do you think of first?
What I think of, because in my position at Tech, I'm teaching juniors and seniors. So somebody's really done the hard work before me to lay out what the expectations are. When they get to me, I'm one of those professors that doesn't really care if you come to class or not. You're paying for the privilege to be there, but if you show up, I promise you're going to get 100% of everything we have. And so I think that basically let the class come to life on its own. Just give them the highway to take them there. And if you do your job right, it's pretty interesting after 16 weeks with these young people.
Right. You were quoted, I forget where I saw this, but quoted as saying, that hiring has changed in television. It used to be to get to Channel 7, you had to do something else first.
That's right.
And now it's kind of like 10 seconds out of college, I think was your quote, and we're hiring them. What responsibility does that put on the institution, the station, to, there's still teaching that has to be done when that employee walks in the door, I'm sure.
I think just awareness of what the market is. I think universities have always done a pretty nice job of trying to point people to success when they get out, and it used to be your grade point average. It used to be what courses did you take. Now it's what did you do while you were in college? Did you learn about this? Did you learn about that? So if we sequence this properly, not only will they learn what they need to learn, but we'll teach them things they didn't even know yet, and then have that all-important internship with them. Once that occurs, then they can determine whether they want to do this, because they don't really know yet. But when they walk into WBRA and look around the studio and go, this is cool, right? And then it sparks the imagination and away they go. It's our job to kind of introduce them to that while they're in school.
And I'm struck by, in the K-12 world, the more focus on that there than there used to be. Right. I think my teachers in high school were just like, get to college and we'll worry about, that's all we're going to worry about.
Right.
But now it is, if you're going to get into a good college, you need to do these service projects.
That's right.
We have a high school intern here who helps us. I think the standard, I look at the students today in college, high school, as being so far ahead of where I was. Do you find that to be true?
I do, and we even treat our interns as if you're going to be here for 16 weeks or whatever. But when you're done with this, you're hired. Maybe not necessarily right here, but we work for a company that has 160 stations across. You're hired.
160 stations.
Yeah, the three major companies own all the stations. So that's great because it gives us flexibility. We could send them to Lincoln, Nebraska if we had an opening there. We could keep them right here in Roanoke. We could send them up to Charlottesville. In Virginia alone, we own the stations in Harrisonburg, Charlottesville, Richmond, and Roanoke. Well, those are all the good places you want to be in Virginia to start your career and get going. So yeah, it's a different dynamic, but internships are the key.
I think about that consolidation of media, which we could probably talk about for its own hour.
You bet.
You know, the Roanoke Times and the Lynchburg paper are owned by there used to be such competition,
Right.
even between communities. I mean, there was always competition in town.
Right.
Has that sort of now partnership with Richmond stations and Charlottesville stations, what's that done, you know, sort of for the viewer?
Well, for the viewer, it keeps us viable because now you don't have to staff all of that. They're all your staff. It's not that we're getting lazy and not going to cover things, but now we have better access to things. So if James Madison does something remarkable, we've got that video and sound in the technology that's available. So it's a much bigger picture for the viewer than we could do by ourselves.
Well, as I expected, time has flown, and I hope that you've enjoyed this visit with Robin as much as I have. Robin, for all of us in the Roanoke Valley and beyond, thanks for taking the time to be with me today. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.